So we have a very special guest with us this morning. Eitan Bloostein is from Boston. He is a graduate of Tufts University and a first-year student in the Rabbinical School of the Jewish Theological Seminary. What some of us may not realize is that because of the pandemic, many of the students at JTS have not had, for about 2 years now, or over 2 years, have not had an opportunity to visit congregations, since most of the congregations moved to online or other virtual settings. Just as we, as a congregation, have not had the opportunity to have many scholars in residence or young rabbinical students join us in person, to remind us, I think, of something very important that we should remind ourselves of constantly, and that is that the existence of our synagogues, the thriving nature of our synagogues, depends on a large web of different organizations, including, and perhaps most importantly, on rabbinical schools. When you look for a rabbi, they don't just get picked off trees. Rabbis have to be trained appropriately, have to have opportunities to visit congregations and work in many, many different settings in order to prepare them for the modern rabbinate, which requires many, many different skills and requires a great deal of flexibility in those skills as well. So I think we owe it to ourselves as a synagogue often to remind ourselves of our dependence on other institutions in the conservative movement and beyond, who are there to help sustain and provide the religious leadership that we need in order to function. And we have a wonderful guest with us today, so I hope that you enjoy learning with him when he presents his remarks now. And if you do, then I really do encourage you to stay following a special Kiddush luncheon in his honor. He'll be remaining to do a shiur with us, a class on the use of Zoom technology on Shabbat, which is a really interesting question, the limits of technology on Shabbat and the challenges that Zoom presents. So Eitan, welcome to Beth Tikvah, and it's my honor to introduce you to the congregation.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Grover. Thank you to the Beth Tikvah community for hosting me this weekend.
You're taller than
me. Just a little bit. B'shut Harav. This past Rosh Hashanah, I was leading teen services when suddenly the fire alarm went off. My first thought was not that maybe there was a fire. My first thought was that there was an active shooter. My active shooter training kicked in. I firmly but calmly instructed the teens to move outside of the building, and I placed them in the predetermined location in the woods behind the synagogue. It was a false alarm. 20 years ago, it would have been unthinkable that at the suburban shul where I was working, a fire alarm could have meant anything other than a potential fire. Today, it's unsurprising, perhaps even the expectation, that an alarm could signal another kind of life-threatening situation. Jews today and other minority groups are increasingly targets of violence. And we are targets because we are different. There is a scary trend happening globally today. A rise of intolerance for the differences between human beings. and efforts to stamp out those differences. In the United States, Florida just passed the so-called Don't Say Gay bill that forbids teachers from discussing homosexuality in classrooms. This stifles the ability for students to even learn about the range of possible expressions of their identity. Gay students are forced to see the world through rigid categories that erase their personal expression of self. Last weekend, only 2 hours down the road from here, 10 black people were shot in Buffalo, New York, just because they are black. Investigations have shown that the shooter was motivated by white supremacy. He went out of his way, drove to another city to commit this egregious act of killing black people. Accepting difference and diversity in humanity is fundamental to a Jewish worldview. Diversity allows us to see God in our world. If every person is created in the image of God, then the more diverse expressions of personhood that we have, the more differences between people that we see, the more we can come to understand the many facets of the divine. We can best see God as refracted through the sum total of all humanity. It is imperative for us to see divinity in our world because it gives us perspective on our lives, depth to our experiences, and meaning to the practice of our tradition, to mitzvot. We should strive for a world in which people are free to express their gender, religion, sexuality, all aspects of their humanity, as long as it does not harm others. The mosaic of unique individuals, each bearing an imprint of God, forms a reflection of the divine. Stifling of difference in self-expression and diversity does not allow such a mosaic to form. It conceals divinity from our world. It comes as no surprise that in the rich history of the Jewish people, we have been targets for our difference. We were targets from the beginning of our nation's history. In Egypt, the Israelites were productive members of society. Still, Pharaoh targeted the Israelites for being different than the Egyptians. Look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us, says Pharaoh. And on account of their differences, he continues, let us deal shrewdly with them, so that they may not increase and join our enemies in warring against us. Pharaoh was threatened by the other simply because they were different, diverse. He enslaved the Israelites to remove diversity from Egyptian society. The Israelites, oppressed in their slavery, could not be pieces of the Egyptian mosaic. Because he rooted out slavery in his society, Pharaoh could not recognize God. Moses approaches Pharaoh saying, "Thus says Adonai, God of Israel, let my people go." Pharaoh responded, "Who is Adonai that I should heed him?" A midrash teaches us that Pharaoh's question was not rhetorical. In the midrash, Pharaoh angrily commands one of his servants to produce a list of all of the known gods in Egypt. Pharaoh does not find our God, Moses' God, Adonai, on that list among them. In a society such as Egypt, a society that stifled diversity, the unique mark of God that each person bears is suppressed. God cannot be found. Pharaoh knew not of God, of Adonai, because he could not see the reflection of God in the rich mosaic of diversity. If each person is created in the image of God, then the differences between and the diversity of people reflect different aspects of God. In a society where diversity is oppressed, we cannot see God. We Jews have a blessing that celebrates diversity. In many Sidurim, we can find a blessing that we see upon seeing unusual people. The circumstances under which we can say this blessing are as diverse as humanity itself. A tall person, a talented person, someone with unusually styled hair, large hands or feet, an unusual birthmark. In all of these moments, we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, mishaneh habriot. Blessed is Adonai, God, sovereign of the universe, who makes differences in creation. When we see the differences in people, the spectrum of diversity that is humanity, we better see God. We thank God for diversity in humanity because it is only through this diversity where we can come to know God. The country of Ukraine today is a country that has come to appreciate diversity. In their celebration of diversity, they see the divine, although they may not define it as such. I would contend that in large part, it is because of their turn towards diversity, the mosaic of difference that thrives in their society, that much of the world cries out at the Russian invasion. I recently read Masha Gessen's article in The New Yorker entitled "The Holocaust Memorial Undone by Another War." In it, Gessen describes the evolution of how Ukrainians remember the Holocaust over time. The Holocaust began in Ukraine in late September of 1941. The occupying Nazi army gathered all of the Jews in Kiev to an area outside of town called in Ukrainian Babin Yar, also known as Babi Yar. Over the course of 36 hours, the Nazi forces shot and killed 33,071 Jews. In Kiev, with Ukrainian collaboration, the Nazis worked to systematically erase difference and diversity. This illustrates a way to think about what the theologian Richard Rubinstein called the death of God that started in the Holocaust. Where there is no diversity, where there is systematic erasure of difference, we cannot see God. God is hidden. After World War II, Ukraine was a member of the Soviet Union. God remained hidden. Although the Soviets knew that Jews were the victims at Babin Yar, they placed a plaque at the site that read, "A monument will be constructed here to Soviet people who fell victim to the fascist crimes committed during the temporary occupation of Kiev in 1941 to 1943. This monument shows that Soviet officials sought to erase the historical reality that it was Jews who were targets of the Holocaust. In this way, they refused to acknowledge the differences between Jews and non-Jews. They sought to stamp out diversity and ignored the importance of the mosaic that would have allowed them to see divinity. After Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, the first human to travel to outer space, returned home, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev said, "Gagarin flew into space and didn't see any God there." Khrushchev was looking in the wrong place. By abolishing concepts of diversity in Ukraine and the rest of the Soviet nations, the Soviet Union concealed God from its citizens. We do not see God in space. We see God in humanity. Without allowing room for robust differences in humanity, we cannot see the multifaceted mosaic that is a reflection of the divine. When Ukraine gained independence in 1991, there was a shift in its approach to diversity, and with it, an ability to see God. As Ukrainian society began to open, it started to accept diversity, the differences between people that had always been present in its society. The year that Ukraine gained independence, it created a memorial to the Jewish people at the site of Babin Yar. This memorial took the form of a large bronze menorah, the internationally recognized symbol of the Jewish people. This memorial is a statement that the Ukrainian people were now accepting Jews as a part of their society. They accepted the diversity and difference that the Jewish people bring. In 2014, Ukraine experienced the so-called Revolution of Dignity. During this upheaval, Ukrainians demanded a more open society based in Western liberal values. They ousted their president and elected Petro Poroshenko. It was an open secret that Poroshenko's father was Jewish. Within 2 years, the new government, acting on liberal values, organized a major commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the Babin Yar massacre. The words Babin Yar were plastered around Kyiv, advertising this event. These words, Babin Yar, were now recognized as in Ukraine as the site where Jews were targeted, where people who held difference were targeted, massacred because of those differences. The Ukrainian people could accept that. The Ukrainian people elected a leader with Jewish heritage and made impressive efforts to commemorate their role in the Holocaust. Ukrainian society began to value diversity and to celebrate the differences between its citizens. As you all know, now Ukraine is led by Volodymyr Zelensky, an impressive, openly Jewish grandson of Holocaust survivors. 30 years ago, we would have thought of Ukraine as closed, unaccepting, a place where God is hidden. Today, we see Ukraine as a country that cherishes its diversity, a place where we see the reflection of God in the mosaic of humanity. It is partially for this reason, for the reflection of God that we see in Ukraine, that I believe the world is so outraged. There is a scary trend happening globally today. Jews are being attacked for being Jews. Gay children are being told that there is no room for their identities. Black people are being shot for being black. In Russia's attack on Ukraine, it threatens a society that has worked hard to celebrate difference and diversity. Attempts to stifle diversity further conceal God. The uniqueness of every person bears the image of God. When the images of God that we each bear in our uniqueness are accepted, celebrated, we come to see the divine. The mosaic of human beings living in the fullest expression of themselves, expressions of religion, ethnicity, Sexuality, gender, is a collection of unique images of God. It is a reflection of God in our world. When people are targeted for their difference, God in our world is concealed. For us to understand the divine in our world, for us to see God in our world, we must act and fight for societies that accept and celebrate difference and diversity. Shabbat Shalom.